Good evening. Hello. That's great. There is life in the room. The nice thing about this is I can't see any of you. I'm completely blinded by lights. I can occasionally hear breathing. I'm not sure I like that. Anyway, it's fine. Good evening and welcome to Creative Brain Week. You are all very, very welcome. You are welcome if you're joining us here, but you're also welcome if you're joining us online. So for those of you that have never been here before, Creative Brain Week exists in many dimensions at the same time. It exists in this room, the Packer Theatre, the Nocturne Institute and Trinity College Dublin, and it also exists by the power of the internets in various places around the world. And we have two audiences going on. For those of you that have not been before, my name is Dominic Campbell. I'm your host for the next few days. I'll tell you a little bit about the programme and then I'm going to introduce people. This evening is all about community. It's all about the community that we built over the last 3 years. This is now the 4th Creative Brain Week. It's actually the 10th because we've done 6 of them in other parts of the planet over the last 12 months, and we're going to talk about those. We're going to invite people to talk about those. But I guess the first thing is, what is Creative Brain Week? So Creative Brain Week is an experiment in communication. It's a place where we invite people to gather once a year in Dublin and at other times around the planet and to talk to each other about creativity and the brain. So let us start by me inviting you, in a good Irish wedding tradition, to introduce yourselves to somebody next to you that you've never met. Say hello. Shh. You might shake their hand. Okay, all right, okay. It's enough of that. Stop. Thank you. That's all right. Back to me. Eyes to me. So here's there are in this room are many people. In this room are many people who use very different ways to make knowledge. They use all sorts of different ways to ask questions and answer questions. My way of asking questions and answering questions for the next 2 days, when I know that we've got a successful thing going on, is that I get increasingly ignored over 2 days. Right? The conversations that people are having, when I go, excuse me, can you bring your eyes back to it gets lesser, okay? So I'm delighted that we start a little bit of conversation. We're going to come back to that in a few minutes. A few things have changed, so I want to give you a little sense of that. Creative Brain Week, in order to get very different people, very different expertise, very different lived and learned experience together, started by offering people themes. So we said, if we're going to bring all of these people together, maybe they can look at, a key word, and wherever their discipline is, whatever their discipline is, they can explore that key word. This year, we've moved a little bit. We have moved to look at activating kindness. So tomorrow is all about activating kindness. And I'm going to invite to the stage 3 people to just say a few words about activating kindness. I'd like to invite Iracema Leroi. I'd like to invite Nicholas Johnson and Brian Lawlor. And while they're coming to the stage, I can explain. Thank you. So I like setting people questions. It's a small thing I get to do. Iracema is the site director of the Global Brain Health Institute. Nicholas divides his time between the School of Drama and the Global Brain Health Institute. And Brian is the founding director for the Global Brain Health Institute. So they're great people. They are largely responsible for this happening at all. And I'm going to ask them, starting with Nicholas, to just say 2 minutes about what is activating kindness in your work and in your world.
Thank you so much, Dominic, and thank you again for providing such an example of activating kindness. I think not only the sense of this program and what we see and the communities that you've brought together, but just the energy unleashed when you gave us the chance to speak to each other. You can already tell immediately that there's an openness, a sense of trust, a sense of companionship, and community on the path that we are here to explore and investigate questions around both creativity and questions around brain health. So as you alluded to, my home discipline is in the theater. My home school is in the School of Creative Arts. My faculty is the Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. And so I often come to these discussions from a perspective which is perhaps more rooted in a tradition of philosophy, history. I was quite late coming to areas that involved neuroscience. I got interested in this through the neuroscience of acting. And the reason why I get curious about these things, and I think it relates directly to the question of kindness, is that no theater activity is ever done in a solitary way. If you ever hear the phrase one-person show, there's probably 20 people who are involved in making this one-person show happen from every stage of the process. So as I've worked in ensembles over now about 32, 34 years from my time as a child actor, I'm thinking more and more about what it is that actually creates this environment that allows people to build up temporary community, build a sense of trust and companionship, go through professional and personal challenges together, navigate the emotional, empathetic, trust-based complexities that arise in situations with very low budgets, very low time. And I've started to think a lot more about what this studio practice can have to teach us, both about our own lives as we relate to the earth at a time of scarce attention, at a time of enormous pressure from external factors on conflict, of great examples that we see across the world of a profound unkindness that we see in the world at the level of humanity, at the level of person-to-person, state-to-state interactions, community interactions, and that the struggles and failings that we see in the public sphere often don't feel necessary when you spend a lot of time in the private sphere, in these kind of small, collaborative communities, domestic, studio-based, breaking bread with people, even strangers, in foreign countries. It doesn't seem always that this needs to be the tone in which things occur. And so the question of kindness, I think, will be elicited a great deal over the coming days. I think what theater and creative arts has a lot to offer is around the activating piece. What is it that we actually do to activate this kindness? We obviously have some kind of innate structure in us that believes in fairness, that reaches out toward companionship and community and social formation. We help those in need as a kind of instinctual matter. We can be made through language and through behaviors to do the opposite, to do other things that go against what seems to be a kind of fundamental drift in our consciousness. So I'm very curious about what it is that we know from universities, from classrooms, from collaborative interdisciplinary environments that enables us to activate this feature of ourselves, that clears away the blocks. And that, for me, I think is a key piece of what I'd like to see emerge, because I think this is where we can go from the local to, as we always have at GBHI, the kind of global, the idea that says we can be global but also conscious of what those local knowledge structures are at a given moment. So that's probably my 2 minutes well gone.
It is. It is. But, it's early yet. So, we thought. Brian.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks, Nick. It's a great privilege to be here. And I guess when I saw the theme this year, Activating Kindness, I think Dominic obviously came up with this theme. I tried to figure this out. What's this all about? But the more and more I think about it, the more and more that this theme of Activating Kindness makes a lot of sense. But I have to say, Dominic, putting me on the stage with Nick Johnson was not an act of kindness. That said, I will try to activate some kindness now. I'm a psychiatrist by training, and I spent most of my life taking care of patients, people living with dementia. And I guess one of the things I've learned has been that you should never underestimate the importance of a smile, a gesture, some kind words. Many times people come back to you, after the clinic, months, years later, and say, that thing that you said, that word that you said, that was important, that made a difference. As clinicians, we would often have no idea what that word was, but it definitely related to kindness and caring. So I think it's hugely important because it generates extraordinary positive emotions in the person who receives kindness. And that's something I've learned over the last 3 or 4 decades. But also there's huge value in kindness for us as clinicians. I think when we give kindness, when we speak with kindness, when we act with care, I mean, there's huge reinforcing properties for our own brains and for our own bodies. And that's probably what keeps bringing us back and why we do it. Kindness is reinforcing. It's hugely reinforcing. So when I thinking ahead about activating kindness this week, a couple of things come to mind. One is about the challenges. How do we implement this? How do we activate kindness in the current circumstances, in the world that we live in? It's a very uncertain time. But in the healthcare setting, we have huge issues, huge challenges. And I think one of the big challenges that faces us worldwide and in Ireland is the shortage of the healthcare workforce that we're going to face. So how do we create a sustaining environment that will help people activate their kindness? Because I think people do care, they do want to activate their kindness, but circumstances really can pull against this. So I think one of the things I hope we will talk a lot about over the next few days is how do we create the environment, the circumstances where people can be themselves and can activate their kindness for their own health and well-being, but also the health and well-being of people they care for. And finally, my final thought around activation of kindness is I think this is Creative Brain Week, and I think it's the role of arts and creativity really in terms of how we may be able to activate kindness. Because I think when you bring creativity that Nick was talking about together, and you combine that with kindness, it's a powerful prescription. Creativity and kindness. And how do we actually implement that in the healthcare setting? How do we bring creativity and kindness into the healthcare setting? Because I think it is a powerful prescription for change. And I hope that we have a conversation about that, because I think bringing the threads together, I think from your ideas, Dominic, in terms of Creative Brain Week and activating kindness, we want some product, we want some deliverables at the end of this. We want to combine creativity and kindness and its activation for good and for that better health and well-being of the people that we care for.
And Iracema, by no means last and least, what would you like to add?
Thank you very much. So, like Brian, I'm also a clinician, and I work in dementia research. So most days of my working week, I meet people with lived experience of cognitive disorders and their care partners. So it's very much the clinical perspective like Brian's. And I will have to refer to my notes because unlike Nick, I wasn't a child actor, so I've got to use my prompts. So I think in the clinical setting, activating kindness, it's not just a nice idea, but I think it's an absolute necessity. Because as we all know, dementia can strip away not only memory and function, but also a person's sense of safety, their identity, their sense of control. And in those moments, kindness can become an absolutely critical clinical tool. And that's where we see it day to day in the hospital setting. And as Brian pointed out, it's in the tone of our voice, it may be in a single word, it's the time we take to explain something, and the small gestures that affirm a person's dignity when so much else feels uncertain. It's about making eye contact with a person with dementia in the room, rather than talking at them or about them through their care partner. And this is something that we have to be very intentional about, because it happens every day. I believe that kindness is something that bridges the clinical with the human. It helps build trust, it reduces anxiety, and it helps make the diagnostic journey one that is not only tolerable, but empowering. So giving a person a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia in a way that they can understand, in a way that brings in kindness, can help them understand and make sense of the complex world that they are now experiencing. And I see kindness in every day. I see it in the nurse who speaks eye to eye with a frightened patient. I see it in a colleague who gently redirects anger into laughter. And most importantly, I see it in families who show up every single day despite the emotional toil and the fatigue, still choosing love and care. And it's remarkable. And as a clinician, it's absolutely humbling. So what excites me about the program this week, although unfortunately I'll be missing a few days, traveling to the UK this afternoon, but it's really the chance to be much more intentional about kindness, not just as a value, but as a practice that we can cultivate. So I'm looking forward to learning how to embed kindness more deeply into our systems, our communications, and our policies, because ultimately I believe that kindness isn't a soft skill, but it's a powerful intervention. So those are my thoughts, Dominic. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for getting us started. And I'd like to ask you to leave the stage and Gráinne McGettrick and Eimear Glinchey, if you'd like to join us. So this evening we move very quickly. We want to give you a swift flavour of all the elements that go into making Creative Brain Week. All the people, whether they are here or whether they're online, whether they are working in clinical practice, whether they are someone living with a condition, whether they are someone moving from intervention to delivery. And so it's a very fast-moving programme. If it all works out in a marvellous way, it'll run till about 6:15 and then we'll open the exhibition. We get to spend time with people in here, but we also invite people to join us online. And that's where we're going to go next. So let's see if this works. It's always exciting, this. Do we have Eyre?
I'm here, Dominic. Can you hear me?
Perfectly well. Good evening. Good morning, wherever you may be.
That was smooth. Great.
Very smooth. I'm very impressed. Harris joined us about 2 years ago. Harris is a global expert in the development of brain health. And we asked him if he would join us on this opening evening just to kind of check in, to tell us a little bit about how the conversation, the policy, the big strategic shifts around brain health are developing around the world. So, Harris, I'm going to hand over to you.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Dominic, for having me back. I'm delighted to be here, and I really greatly respect Creative Brain Week and what you guys are doing, and good to see friends and colleagues in the room. I want to talk today about the brain economy as a economic transition strategy that could fuel creativity and then also, of course, fuel kindness as well. I am trained as a physician and neuroscientist and an entrepreneur, and I've decided that I will dedicate the rest of my life to this economic transition as a way of trying to infuse brain health and brain capital in all sectors across the lifespan and across the economy, taking lessons from the energy transition, the AI transition, all these other types of big economy-wide transitions is where this comes from. I originally from Australia. I live in America and have various different roles around the place. And so let me explain to you the brain economy, and then try to spark some ideas in the room that we can follow up with. Next slide, please. So first of all, to say that if we are thinking about, if we think about the size of brain health challenges around the world, they are massive. The cost of mental and neurological issues is 3.5 trillion to the global economy, and it's rising at about 3% each year. So this is a big elephant in the room that no one is talking about. The size of brain health challenges is equivalent to that of climate change, for example. And it's not just that we have brain health challenges, we also have what we refer to as brain skill challenges, literacy, numeracy. If you look at measures of creativity, if you look at measures of unfortunately, things like kindness, they're all not doing very well. In many countries, literacy and numeracy, for example, is going in the wrong direction. So we call this brain health and brain skill composition brain capital. Brain capital is we try to explain to people in positions of political power and business power and philanthropic power that brain capital is a thing. You should think of it as like an asset, like a GDP or like road and bridge infrastructure. And we want to try to build brain capital right now in a world where we really need it. We need analytical thinking. We need creativity. We need ways of getting ourselves out of the current situation of complexity of geoeconomics and geopolitics. And so let's think about it as per this slide across the lifespan. We all sit somewhere on this spectrum. We all have friends and family on this spectrum. We're all doing things in our day-to-day that are green or positive influences. We're all probably exposed to things or doing things that are negative influences. But literally, how do you think about this across a nation state? That's the question of the brain economy transition. And how do you ultimately build brain capital? And so you can imagine that this is not just health issues, not just aging issues, it's education, it's women's issues, it's first 1,000 days, it gets involved in things like internet, the use of social media, artificial intelligence, environment. This is really, you can think about each sector of society. What are 3 to 5 things that are depleting our brain capital that we could shift to do the opposite, to build our brain capital? For example, in the food system, what are we doing around ultra-processed foods to study them, to understand them better, or to mitigate their consumption and get into things that are not ultra-processed foods, more farm-to-table and more nutritious forms of food? So that's just some examples. That's the framing for you about the brain economy. We want to transition from a brain negative economy to a brain positive economy, and in doing so, unlock more brain health, more creativity, more kindness. Next slide, please. Important to say that we are heading at the end of this week into the G7 Canada. G7, of course, is the economic NATO involving the 7 countries that we all know: US, Canada, Italy, France, Germany, Japan, United Kingdom, and also the European Union. So Ireland is in there in the G7. G7 breaks economic innovations down into different engagement groups: business, women, youth, think tank, civil, labor, science. So I'm giving you this presentation based on these engagement groups because I'm thinking about this context of G7 Canada. And I also want to make a shout out that I think that next year, working with you, Dominic, we need to engage Creative Brain Week in the G7 France. So let's talk about that in the coming weeks. But anyway, the business sector is very interested in the brain economy. We just did a wonderful event in Houston, Texas, a couple of weeks ago, where we had big business there at the table thinking about what role does business play in the brain economy transition. Mostly we talked about the role of the employees of big businesses. How do we make employees of businesses more brain healthy, more creative, more analytical, all these types of things. We talked about policy, we talked about new technologies or strategies that you can use to support employees. And we had a venture capital fund was launched on the brain economy, which was great. They have 8 different portfolio companies doing different products and services related to the brain economy. And one of these companies is in the bottom right here, a new measurement to look at brain health in the workplace. So the business sector is very interested in this, which is great, because if we really want to achieve an economic transition, we do need the public sector, the private sector, and the philanthropy sector all involved in trying to find ways that they can all work with each other in some kind of harmony. Next slide, please. The think tank sector is also very deeply engaged. Here in the center of the screen, I'm showing you the World Economic Forum's new Brain Economy Action Forum. So we're delighted that we've been developing the brain economy from an idea into more and more levels of maturity. The World Economic Forum has made an actual project out of this. So we are cracking the sort of global economic zeitgeist. We're getting into the heads of national level politicians and business people, and also, of course, researchers and such. And so we do want to keep finding ways to involve different colleagues in this work over time. And BrainLat, you can see there, is actually a part of the World Economic Forum, Brain Economy Action Forum. And I wonder if Agustin Ibanez is in the room there. So we are trying to be as inclusive as possible and slowly stitch together all of our friends and colleagues and collaborators into this work. Next slide, please. The science of the brain economy is very important. You don't just propose an economic transition that is not based on science. We need to be very rigorous and empirical. And so again, mostly thanks to Agustin Ibanez, we have these wonderful frameworks and strategies that we're developing. Now, Agustin has really helped us to show leadership and strategy around this. And now others are catching on in different parts of the world. Here are just some nice overviews. Let's take the one on the bottom left. We can look at the importance of One Health to the brain economy. One Health is that there is one health for people, for animals, and for the planet. And so, of course, we know that that's important in the context of brain health when you look at toxins and environmental exposures and such like, and access to nature. Anyway, that paper was published in Neuron if anyone's interested. So that the science of how we shift from a brain negative to a brain positive economy is extremely important to us. Next slide, please. Now, with this, labor markets are very important. Labor markets, markets which, employ us or represent how we're employed, whether we're employed through the private sector or third sector or government. Important to think, what can we do to build brain capital, to instill creativity and kindness into the labor market, into the workforce. And Brian and Iracema were talking about this in the context of healthcare workers, which is great. What about other workers, oil and gas workers, construction workers, architects? It's important for us to think about what are we doing about neurodiversity and inclusion, stress management, brain performance, et cetera, suicide prevention. Helping people to co-pilot with AI is an interesting strategy to boost creativity, for example. We need to think about how do you boost kindness in the labor market. I don't know if anyone's thought of that before. It's an interesting question for you guys to ponder in the coming days, and I'd be glad to help think that through. Next slide, please. Civil society is this slide I was particularly keen to share with you. Civil society, of course, has a really important role. Arts, culture, and the humanities is really important if you want to really achieve change in the world, if you want a movement. And so that's really where I see the Creative Brain Week as vital to mobilizing civil society. And so if there's a civil component of the G7 that, Dominic, we should think about with Creative Brain Week for G7 France next year, that would be interesting to think about. And we also been working with groups like the Prada Foundation to explore the role of arts and cultural institutions in pushing the brain economy transition in an ethical and responsible and inclusive way. Next slide, please. Just a couple of final slides here. Measurement is very important. We think about this brain economy transition. If we're talking about a brain capital depleting economy and we want to go to a brain capital building economy, then what is brain capital? How do we measure it? We do have a dashboard that looks at the drivers of brain capital, brain health, and brain skills. And it's the data is this dashboard is available online, and it's from openly available data sources. We're always evolving this and improving the functionality. We're looking at algorithms to give a country an individual score of brain capital, so we could compare France and Germany or Canada and America. So you can Google that and find it, and give you an overview of how we're going about measurements. Next slide, please. We're also interested in systems change. How do we actually break down the systems change of a brain negative to a brain positive transition per sector? How do we determine shifts in each sector, 3 to 5 shifts, and then targets and indicators? So we like to think about the food system and artificial intelligence and education, things like this. We're slowly building out this systems change lab, and this is modeled on the systems change lab for climate change. Next slide, please. And final slide here now is to say that we're doing our best. I think part of my role as a medical person is to try to be like a bowerbird and pull from other different disciplines. And so we're working with the European Investment Bank Institute. EIB is the biggest public development bank in the world, and it's a multilateral development bank. It concerns itself with how to improve the living standards of people in Europe. And so we're developing with them a strategy project on investing in the brain economy in Europe. So kind of ask yourself an interesting question. What would you do with $1 trillion to invest in the brain economy in Europe? How would you spend that money? That's the kind of question we're wrestling with and involving private sector partners and philanthropies as well. So a question for you all is, what would you do if you had $1 trillion to improve brain health across Europe? So that concludes my presentation. I hope that gives you a sense of the brain economy. We think it's creative and innovative, but we're obviously always interested to continue to refine it and mature it and make sure it's ethical and responsible. So thank you very much.
Harris, thank you. Thank you for joining me. So I'm joined on stage by Eimear Glinchey, who is a professor in intellectual disability here in Trinity College, and Gráinne McGettrick, who is part of Acquired Brain Injury Ireland, and they are joining me so that we can go from the sort of big interplanetary, that's not right, is it? Planetary scale of that Harris works at to something that happened starting here, and we're going to need to keep it short and sweet, so I'm going to keep cracking along. 2 years ago, yes. We had a session here that was, we have a recipe that underlines Creative Brain Week. And the first element of that recipe is nothing about us without us. And we developed a session, you developed a session, which took about 6 months to put together. Explain what happened, explain what it was about.
Sure. So that session 2 years ago, the theme was around complex joy, and it was a session that was led by people with Down syndrome, where we talked about really the advances that have been made over the last while in brain health and dementia, particularly in the field of Down syndrome. And it was led by people with Down syndrome. A lot of the speakers had Down syndrome, and they spoke about things that they do in their lives to help their brain health. One of the speakers is the first person with Down syndrome who was elected to Fianna Fáil, to a senior position in Fianna Fáil. And it was a really uplifting and I think a really joyous session. But in the audience that day was Athol Kleinans, who's Atlantic Fellow for Health Equity based in South Africa. And we were speaking after the session, and he was really struck, I think, by how the experience of people with Down syndrome here seems so different from his experience or what he knows about the experience of people with Down syndrome in South Africa. And so about a month after Creative Brain Week, we put together through the Atlantic Institute, there's a grant called the Ideate Grant, which brings people together. And so with Athol and another fellow from Health Equity, Blela Vava, we put together a project in South Africa really to raise awareness of Down syndrome in South Africa, where we brought together stakeholders. So there's people from the Department of Health, from Down syndrome organizations, people with Down syndrome and family members, and brought everyone together to look at setting priorities for Down syndrome in South Africa. And one of the things that came from that, which was really unexpected, I think, was around the role of traditional healing practitioners in South Africa in the care of people with Down syndrome and around indigenous knowledge systems. Where in South Africa there's 240,000 traditional healers and about 35,000 MDs. So pretty much everyone with Down syndrome is seeing a traditional healer either as all of their medical care or as part of their medical care. But we don't have that much information in terms of how Down syndrome or intellectual disability or dementia is conceptualized within Indigenous knowledge systems. And so after that, that project, we then decided this is something that we'd look at. And so with a number of fellows, including Kirti Ranchod from GBHI, who brought together an amazing team of people in South Africa from different backgrounds and different knowledge systems, we put together a funding application to the Alzheimer's Association that was funded, and that project is now starting, where we want to better understand how these concepts, or how dementia, how Down syndrome are conceptualized within Indigenous knowledge systems, and if we know that, then can we improve the communication between traditional healing practitioners and MDs in South Africa.
Amazing. Go on. I heard it in the room. So lots of things grow from this stage, and they grow from this stage at a fierce speed. I'm going to jump. Do you mind? If I get time, I'll come back. Last year, Gráinne McGettrick, if you'd like to take the podium. Last year, Gráinne McGettrick hosted a session here with people with acquired brain injury, which had an extraordinary impact on people. So Gráinne, would you like to
Dominic.
take it from there.
Thanks very much, Dominic, and for the invitation to come back and to share some of what we've been up to over the last 12 months. And through successive Creative Brain Weeks and the GBHI Fellowship Programme here, I had the opportunity to get exposed to this exciting world of the creative arts and brain health, and got me thinking about how the creative arts intersects or impacts the lives of people with a brain injury, because after a life-changing brain injury, the world sees you very differently. You become invisible, you're silenced, and you're somewhat of a lesser being. Many people are denied access to the basic rehabilitation services they need to recover, or often given a one-way ticket to live out your life in a nursing home with older people, and despite that, the fact that you might be looking down the barrel of 3, 4 or 5 decades of good living to do. So last year, thanks to Dominic, we hosted a panel discussion of 3 people who had a brain injury, who, again, in the blink of an eye, their lives changed forever. All 3 brought a very unique perspective to their lived experience, because they were all clinicians. 2 of them were occupational therapists, Alison and Magella, and one worked as a clinical psychologist. And I think this was a very compelling and storytelling experience, and a wonderful display of resilience and hope. So we then got invited by another Atlantic fellow, GBHI fellow, Mike Hanrahan, to participate in his series of creative brainwave sessions in the Lexicon Library in Dunleary. And there were loads of talks there, and we engaged, but one of the 2 of the people who spoke were 2 artists who had traumatic brain injuries, and this is Liam. Liam had a TBI, and he joined in our class in Acquired Brain Injury Ireland reluctantly, because basically they wanted him to fill up the numbers. And this is what happened. And another speaker at that event in the Lexicon was Paul, who also has a traumatic brain injury. And Paul will say he's a better person for having had his brain injury. And he says, I don't know if I found art or if art found me. Some of Paul's work. Then, as a part of our organisational work in the general election campaign for 2024, we had an election last year, and we used art as a means to communicate with politicians about what it's like to live with a brain injury. And these photographs are just part of a very large montage that was called This Is Our Lives, which was created by brain injury survivors in our Wexford service, and we used it throughout the campaign as a tool for education awareness. So at the end of 2024, I secured funding for my GBHI pilot project, how to use creative arts as a tool for advocacy. So again, we'll have 12 people over this year engaging in a variety of art forms, creative arts forms, and guided by arts facilitators to tell their story and craft their advocacy messages, and to tell the world as to what it's like to live with a brain injury, use the medium of creative arts. So again, this is going to culminate in an exhibition next March for a Creative Brain Week, and we've called the project making the invisible visible. And again, this was something that I heard the Marshmallow Collective in 2023, so it's something that stuck out from my experience of coming here. And a huge shout out to Dominic as my mentor, and to Professor Lawlor as well for their support in that. So a few weeks back we kicked off this project together with all our participants at the Slow Art Project in Eyre. Just a shout out to that Slow Art. It was a wonderful creative experience for us all. So after that whistle stop tour, here we are in Creative Brain Week 2025, and this year we've definitely moved to the next level, and we've worked with Ciara O'Malley in Brain Injuries Northern Ireland, Brain Injury Matters Northern Ireland, again via matchmaker to Dominic, and with artist Rachel Fitzpatrick, who, activating her kindness and compassion, worked with a group of people with brain injury in Dublin, in our services, and in people with brain injury in Belfast, to create a piece together called Reframing, which you will have the joy of experiencing in the exhibition area. And the Reframing installation is a visual representation of the cyclical journey of change and transformation after acquired brain injury. So what a gorgeous way to work together on an all-island project, and I think this is only the beginnings. So to finish up, what do I see the role of the creative arts in the brain injury world? So I think, taking a sociological lens, I see the elevating of the person's voice. I see an equal playing field. I see engagement, empowerment, participation, and it's all about the agency of the individual, of the person. So what is this? I think when we distill it down, I see that it's giving expression to the key tenets of a human rights-based approach, and a way to make sense of the world again. while rebuilding your life and adjusting to the trauma of living with a life-changing brain injury. So thanks again, Dominic, and please come and join us at the installation. I know Rachel's here and Ciara. Thanks very much.
So, I said this was a speedy whistle-stop tour, lots of on and offs and introductions. Thank you to Gráinne, thank you to Eimear.